Such harsh criticism directed at one of the European leaders has never been heard at any EU summit before. The fact that Viktor Orbán would decide to block an already agreed upon decision on a loan for Ukraine was, for many, an expected development, but still a very unpleasant one. What solutions are European leaders proposing in this situation? What is the Hungarian Prime Minister really trying to achieve? And why do many people call this summit in Brussels his swan song? Let's figure it out. Even before the meeting in Brussels began, global media reported that Viktor Orbán, who became the main obstacle to helping Ukraine, had seriously angered the leaders of the European Union. He was directly accused of breaking commitments and behaving unacceptably. According to Politico, on the eve of the meeting, European Council President Antonio Costa called Orbán to remind him that last December he agreed to provide this loan to Kyiv. At that time, Orbán had set the condition that Hungary would not participate in this financing. However, as it turned out, the agreement was not final. New demands and complaints followed.
For most of the past decade, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has successfully shaped the EU agenda to his will, forcing leaders to overcome one veto after another at high-level meetings. Now, Orbán has taken advantage of the suspension of Russian oil supplies to block a €90 billion loan, breaking his own promise to other EU leaders, and creating the perfect standoff for his campaign in Brussels, Budapest, and Kyiv. From a Politico publication.
Let us recall that at the end of January, after a Russian attack on the Druzhba pipeline infrastructure, Ukraine halted the transit of Russian oil. At that time, a drone struck the largest storage tank, which contained 25,000 cubic meters of oil. Immediately after that, as shown by open-source analysis, including satellite images, a massive fire broke out in the area of the facility. But for some reason, Orbán blames not the Kremlin, but Ukraine for what happened. The Hungarian Prime Minister has made all sorts of accusations against Kyiv. He claimed that the Ukrainian authorities want to draw Budapest into direct participation in the war. He talked about discrimination against the Hungarian minority and alleged that Ukraine is interfering in his election campaign. And recently, he even recorded a video claiming threats against his family. At the summit in Brussels, this rhetoric took on a new dimension. Once again, Budapest made its support for Ukraine conditional on its own unfounded accusations and ultimatums.
We are waiting for the oil. Hungary's position is very simple. We are ready to support Ukraine when we receive our oil, which is being blocked by them. Until then, not a single decision favorable to Ukraine that Hungary would support here will be made. We are waiting for the oil. Everything else is just a fairy tale, so we only believe in facts. The oil must reach Hungary, and then that'll be a new chapter.
EU leaders responded rather harshly to such statements. Viktor Orbán was accused of violating the fundamental conditions of cooperation within the EU and even of betrayal. At the same time, the overwhelming majority of European leaders present at the summit expressed their unconditional support for Ukraine and promised to find a way to provide a loan to Kyiv.
I got the impression that my colleagues, who have been members of this European Council much longer than I have, are deeply outraged by what happened. This is an act of blatant disloyalty within the European Union, the likes of which we've never seen before. I'm firmly convinced that this will leave a deep mark. He's using Ukraine as a weapon in his election campaign, and that's not good. We had an agreement, which he broke. That's why we need to find a solution, a way out, a direction to move forward. And right now, I'm calling on Ukraine and the Commission to resolve the pipeline issue. But most importantly right now is how we will continue to ensure funding for Ukraine. When heads of state and government agree on a decision, it must be carried out. Otherwise, in a way, it means the collapse of the very purpose of our meetings. That's why, for me, there is no Plan B, because Plan A must be carried out. The authority of the European Union depends on this.
To compensate for disruptions in the Druzhba pipeline, Croatia can supply oil to Hungary and Slovakia through its Adriatic pipeline. It allows for the transportation of up to 15 million tons of oil per year, and that's more than enough for both countries. Croatian Prime Minister Andrej Plenković stated that Viktor Orbán is well aware of these possibilities, as well as the fact that the European Union set a course to gradually phase out Russian energy resources 4 years ago. But all of Budapest's complaints have nothing to do with supply security. They're simply about not wanting to give up cheap Russian oil.
Croatia can ensure energy security and oil supplies to both Hungary and Slovakia, even when friendship isn't working. So, as friends, as neighbors, as those who want to be partners to our long-standing historical friends, the Hungarians and Slovaks, we are ready to work for their economies, to supply them with the oil they need. Andrej Plenković, Prime Minister of Croatia, at the EU summit in Brussels.
Stirring up anti-Ukrainian hysteria is also an attempt by Orbán to hold on to power. With less than a month until the elections, and as the latest polls show, the opposition party, TISA, is leading Orbán's Fidesz by 14%. To distract attention from his own failed economic policies, Orbán invents scare stories about Kyiv and Brussels for his electorate. He frightens people with talk of an energy collapse and sabotage at key infrastructure sites. He claims that there's not enough money, not because of corruption in the country, but supposedly because the European Union has taken everything and given it to Ukraine. All government media are also fully exploiting the topic of Russia's war against Ukraine. For example, they claim that the opposition, following orders from the EU, is already preparing to send Hungarian soldiers to the front lines. According to the Financial Times, a Russian advertising agency is helping Orbán with this disinformation campaign. The entire process is overseen by Sergei Kiriyenko, the first deputy chief of staff of Putin's administration. He has previously led similar operations in other countries.
The campaign has two goals: to boost Orbán's ratings and to destroy the reputation of his rival, Peter Magyar, the leader of the TISA party, which is ahead of Fidesz in the polls. Orbán is portrayed as a strong leader with global friends, while Magyar is depicted as a Brussels puppet with no external support. The agency is aware of the risk. Direct support from Russia could harm Orbán, so there are no direct contacts with the Hungarian government. The content appears local. Adapted memes, videos, infographics, and materials tailored for the Hungarian audience.
If Hungary continues to block the loan for Ukraine, the European Union may implement the so-called Plan B. This would mean bypassing the unanimity mechanism and providing aid through an intergovernmental agreement directly from EU countries to Kyiv. At the same time, some European politicians suggest not rushing and waiting for the results of the April 12th elections in Hungary. If Viktor Orbán loses, his successor may lift the blockade in exchange for EU funds being provided to Budapest. But the possibility that Orbán will stay in power and keep throwing a wrench in the works should also be taken into account. That's why, at the next summit in Cyprus, they might discuss some pretty tough measures that haven't been used before, from freezing funding and imposing fines to invoking Article 7 against Hungary, which would strip the country of its voting rights in the European Union.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.